Alright guys, so hopefully this microphone is a little bit better, uh, specifically that it's a little bit louder or at least clearer for you to understand what I'm actually saying rather than the last video. But as we continue on, we're kind of finishing up our topic for this, and I just want to make sure to get through some of the key points. That's why today the lesson is a little bit different than what we would normally have. In this case, we're just going to go through a couple of practice problems just to kind of like solidify some of the information. So in this case, on the slides, I'm not going to be doing all the questions, just a sample of them so that you can do the rest of them yourself. So with our very, very first slide, we are looking at actual sentences. So just remember that any variable, any of these variables, whether it be P, Q, S, is actually a sentence in disguise. So each of these is equal to something. So for reference, that very first question where we're asking to get the negation of the sentence, the sun is shining, well, that's actually just a variable. So we could say that P is equal to the sentence, the sun is shining. And if we wanted to get the negation of that, we also can remember that this little squiggly line put in front of any of the variables is a negation. We are taking the inverse of whatever it is. So the question itself is actually asking us to take this sentence as is and just write it as a negative. So this is our form as the variables, but what we actually want to see is we take the sentence and we put a not, a no, anywhere in there to make this sentence negative. So you do have to be a little bit mindful about where you put them, but it typically becomes a little bit obvious where you might want the no. Definitely not at the front, because if we said the sentence, no, the sun is shining, that doesn't exactly give us the proper response we want. We'll most likely end up putting it somewhere in the center, and in this case, definitely not the not sun, the sun not is. Again, like I said, a little bit obvious where it goes. We're just trying to write the sentence now as a negative. The sun is not shining. And that's all it is that we're looking to get here. Moving on to the second slide. The second slide is where we actually kind of take more of a combination between the idea that these variables are actually sentences, because we are given three variables. We're given A, B, and C. So in this case, I'm not going to write out each of these as they are on the slides, but for reference, A is the sentence, my drink is green, B is the sentence, it is raining, and C is the sentence, the clouds drift by. So each of these are sentences that have either they can be true or they can be false. If I'm drinking water that isn't dyed, well then the sentence my drink is green might be false. If it is very, very sunny out and I have the sentence it is raining, well that's clearly false, and so on and so forth. So each of these have a true and false value. Now we're not looking to get the truth tables of these, but I am going to set the types of truth tables for them just as a bit of a reminder as what actually goes on with them. In this case, we're actually just getting the exact sentence that we're looking for. So for the very first example, we have A, this upside down V, and C. Now to remember that this upside down V is an and symbol, otherwise known as a conjunction. So that means that both of these values must be true for it to be true. So if we want to just write it out as per normal, then we would take A and just put it right down as my drink is green. So I write down my drink is green. I go So I've finished with that. So I'm done with this section here. I move on to the next section, this conjunction symbol. And I'm not going to put down conjunction. That's why we have the other term for it, and, because then I could just put an and into our sentence and continue on to our last part of it, C, where we look back at what C is. C is just the sentence, the clouds drift by, and so I would write down that the clouds drift by. That's all that's really being asked of us in this case, but as I mentioned, just to make sure that there is some clarification to it, whenever we have a truth table, in this case we have two variables. So those two variables will be put down as our values. Within our values, we need to make sure that we have every combination of true and false we could have, making sure that there are no repeats. So ultimately, it does not matter how you write them, just make sure that there are no repeats and you have every value you can have. Those being that you have both true. You have the two different mixes of true and false, where the first term is true and the second is false, and then when the first term is false and the second is true, and then when you have the first term as false and the second term as false. These are your only four, and it's always best to check if you have any repeats. If you have repeats and you have four terms, then you're missing one. Go back and take a look. Now we add on a secondary part, which is our new sentence, A and C, where the only time it is true is if both A and C are true. The only spot that happens is our first row where they are both true for our conjunction. So that is the only place it is true. In every other case, at least one, if not both, of our values are false, and so it ruins it for our final value. If we go on to our second question, we have that little squiggle in front of our B. We have a right side up V and C. So now we're using our B term, which is a little bit different. It is the sentence, it is raining. We also want to remember that this V stands for, is an OR symbol, otherwise known as a disjunction. Now an OR symbol is looking to make sure that either one of these values is true, and then the result is true. So as long as not B, which, to remember, this little squiggle means not. So whenever we want to write this particular sentence, we have to make sure that we negate the sentence. So rather than saying it is raining, we'd put a no or a not in there somewhere, changing it to be it is not raining. So as long as this is true, or C is true, where C stands for the clouds drift by, then our final result is true. And we could take a look at that with our truth table more closely. Now again, since we are using two variables, we set down those two variables, B and C, within our graph, and we make sure to have every combination. True, 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 false, false, true, and false, false. As long as we have these combinations, we tack on the sentence we are looking at, in this case, not B or C. For ease of taking a look, since we are negating B, we could set that up as an additional part of our truth table, just taking the opposite of whatever B gives us. So true to false, true to false, false to true, false to true. And then we take a look that as long as at least one of these values is true within our row, this should be true. So we take a look. Is not B true? No. Is C true? Yes. We got a yes. We put it down as true. All right, so is not B true? No. Is C true? No. Neither of these are true, so that makes this false. All right, is not B true? Yes. Why not? Let's also check C. That's also true. We didn't need to check C because we have not B as true, so our final result is true. And then is not B true? Yes. Is C true? No. But since we have our first value as true, we get our final result as true. Now, again, the point of this exercise is just being able to combine whatever sentence is given, whether it is an if-then statement, whether it is a conjunction or disjunction, and regardless of how many terms you put down, the only thing you really have to do for these is maybe change up the sentence so that it is more grammatically correct, or just sounds a little bit better, where the values still stay true. See, in this case, we still get the not be, where it is not raining. Or C, the clouds drift by. The last slide is looking more for the actual terms. So in this case, we don't have any sentences that are actually given to us to work with. We instead have a question that is asking us to change up what we are given. So like for the first question, we are asked to find the inverse. Now it's important to remember what converse, inverse, and contrapositive do, where converse, for an if-then statement, changes it up so that you switch the values, but nothing else happens. So in the case of, say, if P, then Q, by taking the converse, you switch between these two values so that you end up with Q going where P is and P going where Q is, to give us a sentence that is if Q, then P, and that is our converse. Inverse just takes the negation of whatever you're given, and contrapositive does both. So in the sentence that we're given, we are being asked to find the inverse of the sentence, if I can't swim, then the sun is out. Then the sun is out. Now, in this case, we are given a complete sentence. It is always recommended to see if you can't turn that into a conditional statement and actually see it in terms of our variables. So we dissect our sentence to see what is what. So the first thing that we want to look for is the if-then part of the sentence. So we have if, we have then. These are not going to be part of our actual variables. They are just going to be the arrows. Then we take a look, what could our first value be? Well, between the if and the then, we have an I can't swim. The thing about this is that there's a can't, so can not. Because there is some negative form of a sentence within it, then we know that we have a negation in front of whatever we're looking at. So our sentence would actually be, let's label it as S, and S is the sentence, I can swim. Then we take a look at our result. Our result should be after the then, and that would be the sun is out. So since there is no negation to it, let's just set this out as O, and O would be the equivalent of the sun is out. So we could always change between our actual sentences and our variables set with our symbols. So now we're being asked for the inverse, and in this case, or in this case, all we do with the inverse is take the variables themselves and negate them. So if we take a not s, two negations, two negatives make a positive, so we end up with a positive s. Our conditional, the arrow, stays as is, but then we take a look at this O, and the O is positive, so when we negate it, it becomes negative. And then this could be written as the sentence, if I can swim, seeing that S is the equivalent of I can swim, then the sun is not out. And that is our inverse. So it is somewhat helpful to kind of take any sentence you have into a variable and symbol form, but you can also do this straight out of the bat, where we know that if we can determine which of these are the values, we just need to negate them. In our second example, we aren't given a sentence, we are given that conditional statement right off the bat. So we have a conditional statement that is not P, then Q. So in this case, we just go straight into it. We are being asked to find the contrapositive. Now, again, to remember, contrapositive is taking both converse and inverse. And you could do these in any, however you'd like to start, whatever order you would like to do them in. So let's start with the converse first, because our last question was doing inverse. So first we're going to do the converse. So we determine what our variables are. In this case, very, very simple because they're laid out right in front of us. Not P and Q are our two variables. Now it is important with converse to remember that whenever you have a negation symbol in front of it, you still consider the negation part of your variable whenever you're switching the sides. You don't leave the negation there and only switch the variable. You take everything along with it. Now with converse, we just switch them over so that on the left we end up with the Q, and on the right we end up with our not P. This was just switching it over. Now we take our secondary step, which is the inverse. And so we take each of these values and we negate only the values. So we take our Q and we put a negative in front of it. And when you negate a positive number, make it negative, you get left with a negative. For our P, however, because we're putting a negation in front of it and it already has a negative, two negatives make a positive. So we get left with a positive P. So in this case then, we get our final answer as such, and that was our contrapositive. That is most of what you need to know when it comes to these types of truth tables, variables. Mostly just remember conjunction disjunction, inverse, and these conditional statements, as well as how you can alter these conditional statements. The truth tables are a nice bonus because they can help you understand when these statements are true and not just that they are statements. I hope that this is helpful and that you're able to do the rest of the problems yourself. I hope you are also enjoying your day. Stay safe and healthy.